the design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those of us who have the responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. He gave us information that helped uncover Al-Qaeda cells' efforts to obtain biological weapons.
This is Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper that fell on the afternoon of September 11th.
The government says that fire brought it down. However, 1,500 architects and engineers concluded it was a controlled demolition.
Over 6,000 of my fellow service members have given their lives.
And thousands of my fellow first responders are dying.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
I'm a structural engineer.
I'm a New York City correction officer.
I'm an Air Force pilot.
I'm a father who lost his son.
We're Americans, and we deserve...
I lost my husband.
My son.
My uncle.
My nephew. September 11th, 2001.
Most people don't know a third tower fell that day.
The government says fire brought it down.
The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires.
I, along with 1,400 other architects and engineers,
have found the government's conclusion to be physically impossible.
Impossible.
We need the truth about what happened that day.
Go to rememberbuilding7.org.
Why it fell, why it matters, and what you can do.
Many years ago, in a land called Egypt, there lived a very mean king. Egyptian kings were called pharaohs.
The story begins with the Egyptian pharaoh ordering the deaths of all Hebrew baby boys.
Oh no! They won't get my baby. I'll find some way to save him.
The Hebrew mother of baby Moses tries to save him by hiding him in the bulrushes on the Nile River.
What's that? A baby!
When baby Moses is found by the princess daughter of the Egyptian pharaoh, the princess decides to raise him as her own son. Moses now has two mothers, a royal Egyptian princess mother and a non-royal Hebrew mother who hides her identity as Moses' Hebrew mother, gets a job as a servant at the palace, and helps the princess raise Moses. Why did the Bible omit the historical names of the pharaoh's princess daughter and the pharaoh? Their historical identities can be found by comparing the dates and events of the Bible story with factual Egyptian history. All dates followed by the letters BC count backwards to 0, which is the beginning of today's Christian calendar. Bible researchers have calculated the birth of Moses at around 1520 BC. The ruling pharaoh of Egypt at that time was Thutmose I, and his princess daughter was Hatshepsut. Egyptian history verifies that Princess Hatshepsut married her brother named Pharaoh Thutmose II. But when Hatshepsut couldn't produce a male heir to the throne, her brother husband chose a non-royal mistress named Isis to produce a male heir and named their son Thutmose III. Hatshepsut raised the boy as her own son, even though Isis was his real birth mother. The Bible story of Moses closely matches the factual Egyptian story of Thutmose III. Even the names Moses and Thutmose are almost identical. In the Bible story, Moses gives up his big chance to be the richest, most powerful ruler in the ancient world to become a lowly, poverty-stricken Hebrew laborer. But wouldn't becoming ruler of Egypt and Canaan have been the most intelligent way to help his fellow Hebrews? The historical facts show that's exactly what Thutmose III did. Once he grew up to become Pharaoh of Egypt, Thutmose III organized military campaigns with his mighty armies and chariots and defeated the enemies of the Hebrew Hyksos who had settled in Canaan. After his famous Battle of Megiddo in Canaan in 1479 BC, Thutmoses installed district governors in garrison cities throughout Canaan. Did Thutmoses choose his district governors from the 12 Hebrew tribes named in the Bible? Is it just a coincidence that today's Temple of Isis, located on the Isle of Philae in Egypt, has the same name as Thutmoses' mother? Some suggest that Thutmoses III built the original Temple of Isis to honor his Hebrew mother, who was named after the goddess Isis, and that the temple was later restored by the Ptolemy kings. An inscription inside the temple identifies Isis as the mistress queen of Egypt. Today, Thutmoses III is immortalized in stone in the corporate city-state of London, right next to his Egyptian obelisk honoring the pagan Egyptian god Amun. Why has UNESCO and others spent billions of dollars and years of labor moving the massive tonnage of the Isis temple and obelisks honoring the pagan god Amun? The answer lies within the continuing Bible story. After the Hebrews settled in the land of Canaan, they renamed it Israel. Their king, King David, reigned for 50 years. Egyptian history reveals that Pharaoh Susenes also ruled Canaan for nearly 50 years, at the same time as the biblical King David. Both battled the same enemy called the Sea People or Philistines. Both King David and Pharaoh Susenes had sons with almost identical names, Solomon and Simon. The name of biblical King David's son, Sol-Amon, means son for Saul, and O-M-O-N is an alternative spelling of Ammon. The name of Pharaoh Susenes' son, Si-Amon, means son of Ammon. Simon and Solomon reigned at exactly the same time and fought the same enemies in Canaan, called the Mitanni, the Hittites, and the Philistines. Pharaoh Simon's documented battle with the Philistines in Palestine and his capture of the Canaan city of Gezer clearly proves an ancient alliance between the Egyptians and the Hebrews. The famous King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem means Temple of the Sun God Ammon. According to the Talmud, King Solomon used the dark power of his magic ring to conjure up demons to help him build his temple. The temple became the center for sexual orgies, the worship of golden idols, and for animal and human sacrifices, including the sacrifice of infants and children. The biblical Ark of the Covenant was stored inside King Solomon's temple. The Ark had 4 gold rings built into its 4 corners, each representing the 4 corners of the earth over which descendants of the biblical Abraham are destined to rule. Since archaeologists claim the biblical King Solomon was no more real than the evil wizard Saruman from the movie Lord of the Rings, who built King Solomon's temple? The temple was most likely built by Pharaoh Simon, who King Solomon's fabled character was based on. Today, all that remains of the temple is the Wailing Wall, where Israel's Jews still gather to worship in Jerusalem. Did the Hebrew authors of the Bible's Old Testament really expect readers to believe that Abraham lived to be 175? That his sister wife Sarah gave birth at age 90? That Moses turned staffs into snakes and rivers into blood? Why did the Hebrew authors of the Bible omit all of the important historical names of Egyptian pharaohs? Why did they mix up historical fact with myths and legends? The big question is, what did they have to hide? Researchers of both Bible and Egyptian history have concluded that the Hebrew authors of the Bible covered up the fact that the Hebrews and the Egyptians shared the same royal bloodline. But why? Why the cover-up? Because after the Egyptian people forced the Hebrew Hyksos kings out of Egypt, the only way the Hebrews could continue ruling Egypt was to hide their Hebrew identity from the Egyptian people. They did that by changing their Hebrew names to Egyptian names and intermarrying with Egyptian royalty, just like the biblical Joseph did. By hiding their Hebrew identity, the Hebrews continued to rule Egypt secretly as Egyptian royalty. They worshipped Egyptian gods, followed Egyptian laws, and violated Jewish Hebrew laws. This meant they had to hide their Hebrew identity not just from the Egyptian people, but from the Hebrew people as well. They had to keep their royal Hebrew Egyptian identity and their worship of Amun hidden within royal power circles and secret societies, just as they have done to this day. The world's biggest and best-kept secret is that the descendants of the Hebrew pharaohs of Egypt have ruled throughout history. Over the millennia, they have left oceans of blood in their wake. They have murdered, cheated, slaughtered, robbed, colonized, and enslaved to fulfill their biblical covenants for an eternal throne and one world empire.